Okay, hi everyone. Welcome. Is your first class?
Yes.
Good. So I get to the dubious pleasure of starting your maiden voyage in university studies here at Tyndale. Welcome. First class at Tyndale, first class. Anyone transfer in from another institution? Also no. So first class at university, that's just great. I remember my first class, it was a very long time ago. And I was totally overwhelmed by the experience, and I don't remember much about it. And I don't remember much about what was said in the class either. That's because the first class is pretty much going through the syllabus, which is a rite of passage in universities. And I'm not going to deviate much from that, other than to give you a little overview of what we're doing on the course and why I think it's valuable. Because this is actually one of my favorite courses, even though it's intro, and you're not all English majors yet. But I hope that will change, and I've found over the years that if you're like me, I started at Huron College many years ago, and I was a business major. Or I wasn't a business major. That was my intention, though. I did business and English and economics and math and psych. Those five. It was a general year. But you could see from the choice of courses that I was intending on doing something more practical, and then I just found the only one that really grabbed me was the English. And it really surprised me because I liked reading, but I didn't like English in school. I did not enjoy it for whatever reason. And I actually have many reasons for it. But one of them is the texts that were chosen. And the second is the way it was taught, which is not because of the teachers, because some of them were quite gifted. It was more because of the perspective taken on the literature itself that I found, upon reflection now as an adult and as an academic, was secretly undermining my delight in the texts. So the texts themselves and the whole pedagogy and the whole assumptions that were being given out to me from the classroom were secretly undermining and robbing me of the joy of reading great works of literature. So first of all, we often didn't read great works of literature. We read contemporary stuff, which whatever you think of it, and however much you like it, and obviously it's popular with some, cannot compare to the great texts of old. The great texts of old are called great not just because they're old, but because they have been read and reread and passed on and recommended by generation after generation after generation. And contemporary works of fiction will often allude to them. This word allude is one you're going to need to know, and you won't maybe have heard to, but it's heard of. And the other word, allusion, is something that is very much important in literary studies. It's a reference in the reader's mind to another thing, and in particular a foregoing work. Now that depends on having a memory of something that went before. And one of the great challenges in our day is that our culture is largely without a cultural memory. And that is a direct consequence of a pattern of education that has been taught now for 50 years. And we, as a result, are a culture that is effectively suffering from amnesia. You know what amnesia is. It's the loss of your memory. You can lose your memory by being hit in the head, and you forget who you are. Most people don't really reflect on that very much, but if you think about it, it's a terrifying experience because the people around you, like it depending on how severe it is, but let's say you really don't know who you are. What if you're married with children and the person that claims to be your spouse is as new to you as the person you meet on the street? How would you act? How would you act towards this person? Because this person would have an established relationship with you and would bear with him or her some of the joys of the past, but also some of the frustrations, and you would start not off on a blank slate. You would start off with the baggage of that relationship. So there'd be good sides of it, and there would be bad. There'd be irritations. You know, what you did yesterday morning when you shouted at me or whatever. I mean, I have no memory of that. So the person's still angry with you. Why is this person angry with me? And why does this person treat me differently than the other person? So that would be one of the terrifying things for the person. So if you are brought into a culture with no cultural memory, you are effectively disoriented. You don't know how to act. You don't know how to think. It's also terrifying for the people around you, because they don't know what you're going to do next, because you don't have any memory of what you did before, which means you can't be trusted. So a culture that has explicitly, intentionally robbed itself of its own understanding and memory is a culture that is without a foundation and without any compass for where it's going. It could literally go anywhere. And that is intentional. I'm going to submit to you, and I'm not going to go on at great length in that. I will do that in other classes, not for first year English Lit. But this, one of the things it has done is rob us of the literatures of freedom and dignity. Anyone a psych major here? Have you heard of B.F. Skinner, behavior psychologist? He spoke of C.S. Lewis as one of the most ardent and committed and persuasive defenders of the literatures of freedom and dignity. And for Skinner, the time for those literatures was over. We needed to construct new understandings of what freedom and dignity were, and we could effectively dispense with the humanities tradition and the great moral sense that comes with that. So the moral realism of the great literature, which we are going to study, he thought was insignificant, and we could, modern day psychologists and social scientists, they could come up with new understandings of human nature which would be better than that of the past. Now that's a thesis. It is also a social experiment, and our culture has been the subject of a social experiment now for 50 years. What I'm doing with you in reading the text that I'm going to introduce you to in a second is not a social experiment. It is acquainting you with the works that would have been read by every individual in the educated Western world for generations. There's nothing on this syllabus that would strike them as, I've never heard of that before. In fact, they would all recognize and have heard of the authors, and whether they had read them or not, they would acknowledge that they ought to have read them, and they would have been cultured if they did read them. So one of the products of this course you will be to some degree a cultured person, which doesn't mean that you're a better person than another on a ontological scale, but it does mean that you have a sense of a conversation that's been going on between generations talking about previous texts and previous individuals. The Bible itself works this way, by the way. I would say that the entirety of the Bible is an echo of what happens in the Garden of Eden, Genesis 1 to 3. It's a reflection on those 3 first chapters, an expansion of it. I'll save that for a lecture when I come to Ovid's Metamorphoses and his account of creation. And I'll compare and contrast it with the biblical account, and we'll reflect on that. I don't want to do this in the first class because, as I said, first class, your head's swimming and you don't know where you are really. Or at least that was my experience. So I'll get to that in classes, and I'm just trying to whet your appetite a little bit. Before I do that, let me go to the bare bones. I said I was going to introduce the syllabus. Let me do that here. By the way, I'm recording these classes. I was convinced last year, after being prevailed upon for many years by my colleagues in the philosophy department, that I should launch an online presence. I just refused to do it for many years because I thought it was narcissistic. Having your own website with your name and stuff like that, it's like, I don't want to do that, you know. give me the institution. I'll be a part of an institution, but I don't want to have my own branding and stuff like that. And I still have that reservation, even though I've done it. And obviously, I was persuaded that I needed to get over myself and my own reservations and my own anxieties or my own worries about the internet, because it is the means that so many of us connect with other people and access information. So I have started, oops, it went down. I was talking too long. And what happened? Oh gosh, password, I hate this. I have my own, well, I'll put it in there. Can't open it. How is that possible? Oh, it's because it doesn't have a www, that's why. And of course, it's going to open in a channel I don't want. I'm using Windows or whatever. So I have a YouTube channel, and I will, if you go through the link on your course website, I intend to put up the lectures under Survey of Literature or something like that. I'll call it something like that. And you can, if you've missed one or you missed something that I said, then you can go back and have a look at it. And at the same time, I'm hoping to reach a broader audience. And I've found that so far I've done so. So if you are into that sort of thing, please do subscribe and share it and all that sort of stuff. So it's there's the website, there's me talking about different things, past lectures. I found it fascinating there are people accessing my lectures on Wordsworth from India. And last year I had a student come to Tyndale from Singapore because he heard me on a podcast. So these were things that persuaded me that I actually need to stop acting my age and get with the technology and the power that comes with it and the good things. I mean, there are many negative things, but there are good things about it as well. Anyway, so there's that. Let me go back to the actual course website here. But there's the YouTube channel. I also have a personal website, www.scottmasson.ca. That's more stuff like that. You know where we are because you are here. My office hours are right after the class on Monday, Wednesday. I figured that would be a time when most of you could make it. If you can't make it then, feel free to send me an email or come to me after class and we'll set up a time of meeting. Okay? I'm open to that. Course description. So I'm just going to go through the, oh, this is really not like this at all. So let's see. Like this. Oh man. Oh, you can read it for yourself. But it's going to cover material all the way from ancient Greece, starting with this man, Homer, and his great epic, the Odyssey. I'd love to do the Iliad and the Odyssey, but I can't spend too much time in ancient Greece as much as I would like to. We'll do the Odyssey, we'll read the entirety of it, and I would recommend to you that you purchase it and start reading it right away, because it's not short. It's an epic. Epic has the connotations of long, it's not short. But you'll find, and I think I can say this quite without fear of contradiction, that you're going to find it really exciting. It's a delightful book. It's really interesting. Has been read by generations, for generations, and loved by generations. Now, it's not just because it's entertaining, there's more to it than that, but we'll talk about that when we come to the class. But we are going to look at various genres of literature, one of them being the epic. I'll talk about what an epic is, and it's not just long. Yeah, the word epic is used because an epic is important. Now epic is used for everything. You know, when you do a skateboard trick, you can say that was epic. You know, that's a derivation of the word epic, but this actually is an epic. This is an epic. This is from all of those connotations of greatness, they come from this. Same with tragedy. There's a certain type of literature. We're going to read it. That's called a tragedy. That's a genre of literature. It has certain conventions and features. We will look at them, and we will look at why they're important. and why people read epics and read tragedies. Of all the genres of literature, most people read novels these days if they read anything. The novel is a novel form. The word novel means new. It's a new form of writing. It did not predate the 18th century. Some argue it began earlier. That's an academic debate. But roughly, it's a new form of writing. And it has some of the features of the old, but it loses a lot of them as well. We'll come to discuss that when we come to survey 2. This survey is going to go all the way up to 1660, which is the conclusion of the government of Oliver Cromwell. And next semester we'll kick off with Paradise Lost. That's the dividing line, as it were. But I will connect them, and this is the feature at Tyndale that would probably differ a little bit if I taught this at a public university. I will connect it very strongly with the religious worldviews of the writers. So it's not, Christians have a religious worldview, but so did the Greeks, and so did the Romans, and so did the pagan Anglo-Saxons. And the authors are expressing those worldviews or engaging with them at any rate. And there's no view of life that is not religious, because it talks about things that are of ultimate importance to the author. That's a religious point of view. Whether they refer to God or not, that's not always the case, that God is referred to, but usually it is the case. But there's always something of ultimate importance in the text. And that's part of its religious framework. So when we do this and we read Homer and we read about Odysseus, who's a cunning scoundrel, he's a liar and a deceiver, and the gods love him for it. He's the model, he is the hero of the epic, the Odyssey. How can a Christian read a model of heroism which involves deceit at the very heart of the hero? He doesn't just do it incidentally, it's part of his character, and it's the very thing that the gods praise him for. It's his wisdom. His wisdom is connected with his lying. What are we going to do with that? Like, am I commending it to you for something you ought to do? Obviously not. Why do the Greeks regard it as important? Why is it a reflection of the goddess Athena? The goddess of wisdom, she loves Odysseus. He's her favorite because he's a cunning so-and-so, trickster. So we'll come to that, and then we will reflect on our understanding of what wisdom is and how it's connected with being truthful, and reflect, why do we think that being wise and being truthful are connected? Why is that? Because to this day, most people do. Certainly most Christians do, or they ought to. Although I've found lying is as common in the Christian community as it is outside of it. But that's a disgrace. That's a statement of fact and observation, but it's not something that's commended. It's explicitly spoken against in Scripture. Bearing false witness and so forth. Not lying. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. God does not lie. So I've to some degree given an answer why our view of wisdom is different. But that's not the world's wisdom. Odysseus represents the wisdom of the world. So we'll look at that. These are the learning outcomes. The texts that are there's a whole list of them. I used to have a anthology. Now I've got individual texts. In some ways I'm happier about that, and the cost is pretty much the same, even better. I used to have this anthology. It was a big tree killer of a volume, and I would say 3/4 of it I didn't read and didn't want you to read. We're going to deal with Homer by Lattimore as the translator. Please get this one. It's the best translation. There are some really bad translations out there. I've also tried to get the most cost-effective ones. This is a really good one. Likewise, in the Greek era, Sophocles. We're going to read Oedipus the King. That's a small little book. We'll read by Virgil the Aeneid. Well, the texts are all there, and they're reflected in this. So let's put this up here. That didn't help at all. There we go. No? I really don't like that. This is the problem with technology. By the way, if any of you are technologically gifted, I would love to put this up on a camera and then get an audio so that the audio is better. Like I'm doing it from an iPad right now, which isn't ideal. If you have any gifts in that way and would like to assist me, I would welcome that. So we're going to start on Monday by reading Homer's Odyssey. We will discuss books 1 to 4. Second class we'll go on to books 5 to 12. Well, that's half of the thing in the first week, half of the Odyssey in the first week. So I would say start reading right now and enjoy it. And you will enjoy it. This is the time, this is the heaviest reading on the course, by the way. It's right at the front end. So don't get behind. Try and get ahead on it, and you'll find that if you do, you really, really enjoy the course. Because what we do in the Odyssey, and this is the genius of the layout, as it were, and the use of allusion, is that when we come to one of the figures in Homer's Odyssey is a figure by the name of Tiresias, whom we also meet in Sophocles' Oedipus the King. He's one of the main figures. So there's an allusion back to that figure that we meet in the underworld of the Odyssey, and you've just read the Odyssey, so you know who this figure is and you know what he represents. He's down in the underworld, by the way. Odysseus has to go down to the realm of the dead in order to get the wisdom he needs to get home, and he meets it in the blind prophet Tiresias, who we again meet here in Sophocles' Oedipus the King. He's a blind man. Likewise, when we move forward, and we'll do a brief interlude looking at Plato's Republic, I will give you the text online. I didn't ask you to order it. You may get it for your philosophy class. We'll go on to Virgil's Aeneid. Now, Virgil's Aeneid is another epic, and it is explicitly alluding to Homer's Odyssey. So once you've read the first text, you'll find that the other texts that follow it are alluding to the text, and you will pick up the allusions. It'll remind you of that. In the same way, as I said, in the Bible, when you read Genesis 1 to 3, if you're a careful reader, you'll find it being alluded to by later texts, and the prophets will refer people back to the law of Moses. All the later prophets, and so will the New Testament writers. They'll talk about Scripture in the New Testament, but that was when there was no New Testament. What they meant by Scripture is the Old Testament. And they talk about the authority of the Old Testament, even while speaking. But those are all alluding to knowledge that they assume their audience has. So if you're a New Testament Christian, you can't be a New Testament Christian without understanding and imbibing and really being deeply rooted in the Old Testament. That's the assumption of the New Testament writers. And if you haven't got there yet, which many haven't, then you can read it. It's not too late. But we will go on to that, so we'll read Virgil's Aeneid, and then we will briefly look at Ovid's Metamorphoses, and just the creation account there, and I will, alongside that, and I probably should have put in here, Genesis 1 to 3. And we will compare and contrast. What I'm going to do in that class is to show how different the account in Genesis is from the ancient Near East texts of its day. Now, I could have talked about others as well, but let me deal with Ovid, which is another epic written by a contemporary of Virgil, and it shares many of the same features that you will see very common to Babylonian epics, so-called. And we'll look at the view of mankind, we'll look at the view of the gods, we'll look at the beginning of the cosmos, how it all began. We'll look at the account of wisdom, we'll look at the account of the fall. All those are there, and we will see that there are many similarities. On a superficial reading, it sounds very similar. On greater scrutiny, you'll find that it is directly contradicting the accounts that are there in the creation accounts of the Babylonians and the Greeks and the Romans. Very different. The gods different, the view of human nature is different, the view of wisdom is different, etc., etc. And the effect of all that is the great commandment of Jesus to the Great Commission, to go and make disciples of all nations and baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Right? That Great Commission is, I'm going to argue, a call to Edenize the world, to make the whole world into a Garden of Eden, which was the original commandment given to Adam and Eve. Make the whole world into Eden. Eden, by the way, is within the garden. Eden is a place within the garden, and then there's a place outside the garden. Adam and Eve's original commandment is to make the world that they've been placed into a better world, make it more like Eden. And they will do that by obeying God and not eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But I'll reflect and expand on that. And so when we are coming to this here, we are going to simultaneously be reflecting as Christians on, here's what the early Christians were thinking about. This was their worldview. It was very different than ours. It was the pagan worldview of the Greeks and the Romans. They had to speak to that culture, and they had to transform that culture. They had to make an Eden out of the wilderness of the culture around them. They were aborting babies. They were setting them out. If you didn't want a baby, by the way, you stuck it on the corner at a designated location, and you let the wild animals eat it. You just expose it to the elements. Very common practice in the day. A Roman father had the absolute power of life and death over everyone in his household. So if you could be a Roman father's son, but until he adopted you as his son, a formal legal adoption, he could disinherit you, and you would be nothing. So you could be natural born son, but if he said until he adopted you, he could act as if you were nothing, or daughter. So you had to be. What do you think the relationship between children and parents was like? You better obey dad. That's for sure. Right? There's a lot of power, and the state does not intervene. Huge power. That's all going to be transformed by Christianity. It's all going to be transformed. Not only will they stop exposing their own infants, they'll go to the street corners and they will adopt those children of someone else as their own and bring them up that way and raise them as Christians. Because remember, one of the metaphors of the Christian faith is being adopted. You're adopted into God's family. So these things are transformative culturally. Whether you're born as a slave, whether you're born as the son of the emperor, you are all have the same status before God. You're all sons and daughters. Adopted sons and daughters. So the same standing, whatever your nature, whatever your appearance, whatever your background, you have achieved that standard. Now, it's a high standard. It's a standard that will lead you to be able to defy emperors, because now you're the son of the king. But at the same time, your sin shows that you are as low on the status of the cultural totem pole as the worst thief. The worst. There, but for the grace of God, go I. I could be just as bad as that person. So there's that curious dichotomy. You have great worth in God's sight. At the same time, your depiction is as bad as could be. You are a great sinner. There's nothing that you could not do of your own because of the consequences of the fall. So I will get to that when I talk about Ovid. I made Ovid sound more interesting than Ovid is. It's only one class, but we will talk about that there, and we'll reflect throughout on that. Then we'll come and we'll jump forward. My goodness, we'll jump forward 13 centuries to Dante. Dante's Divine Comedy. You might have heard of it, you might not have. I heard of it. I read about it in a Hardy Boys novel when I was, I don't know what age, but Dante's Inferno. I thought, oh, what's that? I've heard of it now because I read the Hardy Boys, but I didn't read it in school. How come? I mean, they were referring to it, the Hardy Boys were referring to Dante's Inferno. I'd only heard it as a reference. Why didn't I read it in school? By which I mean public school. How come I didn't read it? When I came to read it, I thought, this is really interesting. So we're only going to deal with the Inferno, I'm afraid. We won't get to the Purgatorio or the Paradiso. There are 3 canticles there. But I will talk a bit about that. But we will read that, and we'll talk then about a Christian understanding of what has gone on before, and it's been transformed. It's another epic, by the way. Dante writes an epic. Just like Ovid wrote an epic, and Virgil wrote an epic, and Homer wrote an epic. So now there are 4 epics. And now we have a Christian one. And the Christian one is going to reflect on how different a Christian view of, let's say, the underworld is from what the Christian view of the underworld, which is it's hell, it's the Inferno. Now it's a place of punishment of sin. It wasn't in the ancient world. Everyone went down to the underworld. Good guys and bad guys, they all go to the underworld. There's no heaven. Heaven's where the gods are. Human beings don't go there, they go down to the underworld. We'll come to Dante, and then we will move to another epic. Now the 5th, if you're counting. This is by an Anglo-Saxon poet by the name of, who knows? We don't know the author's name. But we do know that this great work, Beowulf, written in Anglo-Saxon, was written by a Christian author speaking to a pagan Anglo-Saxon warrior culture. And Beowulf is a great warrior. And he encounters 3 great beasts that are ravaging the earth, and they are descendants of Cain, whom he meets. Interesting. And they're beasts. So they're not human, there's something warped and sinful and distorted about them, but they are monsters. This work, by the way, was rediscovered in the 19th century and made famous and became an important part of the English curriculum because of a man whom you might have heard of, J.R.R. Tolkien. And we're going to read Tolkien's edition of the work. It's not his translation of it, but we will read commentary on it. The translation is by a wonderful Irish author by the name of Seamus Heaney, Nobel Prize winner. Sorry, I got that wrong. It's Sir Gawain the Green Knight, which we're going to read, which has been translated by Tolkien. Another medieval poem. Another, not an epic, but dealing with monsters and knights now. There are no knights in the ancient world. There are come the Christian era. So as you can see, we're moving forward through the eras. Oh, by the way, let me say back to Dante. Dante's guide through the underworld is a man by the name of Virgil. So the illusions. Like if you hadn't read the Aeneid, you'd be saying, who's this guy Virgil? And why does Dante regard Virgil as a suitable guide through the underworld? Because after all, he belongs in the underworld. He's a pagan. He didn't know Christ. He didn't revere Christ. How on earth can he be a guide? We'll come to that when we come to it. Answer that question. But again, all of these allusions to previous works, you will start to get a sense of who figures are, what the general cultural landscape is, and how one text is referring back to another text and to some degree paying homage to it. You know, just like in our day, great sportsmen will refer back to the great accomplishment of the greatest figures. You know, like a hockey player, when I was young, it was Wayne Gretzky. You'd always talk about Gordie Howe. Now people will talk about Wayne Gretzky. Well, so in other words, they're playing the game, but when they're playing the game, they're thinking about those that played before them. They never played against them, and yet they're measuring themselves alongside those people. Now you can measure them through statistics, but the best way is if you've actually seen the players, and then you can do the real comparison, because everybody does the stupid stats, goals, assists, whatever. Yeah, but how much better was this player than that player in their day? The goals and assists are part of it. There's a bit more to it than that. Some people say Bobby Orr was the greatest ice hockey player. I think that might be true. Man, when he played, lit up. It's just, you can't take your eyes off him. Gretzky was similar. Anyway, that's just a comparison, sports analogy. But the point is, the great sportsmen think about those that went before them, and they're remembering them, and they're inviting a comparison. So this is another thing that will surprise us, because we think that greatness in literature is connected with originality often. Like if something is a really great song or a great worship song, whatever we'll say, that's really original. That's never been done before. But that's not the historic standard of greatness. The historic standard of greatness is comparison to those that went before you. They don't want amnesiacs. They're not interested in originality. They think that anything that is good and true and beautiful has already been discovered, and the greatest people have followed that path, and we are to model ourselves upon them. And for Christians, our great role model is Jesus. And he compared himself to who? Abraham and Moses. All these comparisons are being made up, and yet he's greater than them. But note that there's a comparison going on. It's not an absolute standard without comparison. Like that alone is it's a paradigm shift. We live in the cult of originality. We need to get out of that. You don't have to be unique and original to excel in your studies here at Tyndale. You just have to be the best version of yourself, and there are those that have gone before you that you can compare yourself to. And that gives you a rootedness, a sense of place, a sense of where you stand in relation to others. And that decreases anxiety in the process. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, because guess what? You can't. I can't either, but you don't have to be absolutely splendid in all things. Just be the best version of you. Anyway, so that will cover the course. When it comes to the assessment, I've got this here at the bottom. Class participation is pretty much you show up and show that you're engaged. We'll have discussion. I invite discussion in class, by the way, although I am a lecturer, and most of the class will be lecturing. There will be 3 means of assessment primarily, though. There'll be 2 essays and a final exam. The first essay comes right at the end of September, and I will put out the topics. Don't ask me for them right now, because I don't want you to read the Odyssey with my essay questions in mind. The purpose of this class is not to answer my questions. The purpose of the class is to read the texts and delight in them. Then we'll come to the essay, but if you read it, the purpose is to take delight in the texts and their greatness. It's not to get a mark on my class. That's not the purpose here. I realize that you want a good mark. Why not? That's a secondary aim. If you are after the grades, you never take delight in the thing itself. You're always like, how do I get a 90 on this course? Like, how do I get... You've just lost the whole plot, the whole purpose of what we're doing here, which is to take delight in the good, the true, and the beautiful. So I will give you the essay questions, but I'm not going to give you them 3 weeks in advance. Unless you have some sort of accommodation, which you need that or whatever, so that's fine. But in general, there's a method to my madness. But the first essay will be at the end of September. The second is, I believe, in November. Yes, mid-November. And then the final exam comes at the end of the course, and I'll tell you more about the final exam when we get closer to that time. But the best thing you can do is start the reading. And I call it work, but it's not work. It takes your time, but it's not work, it's delight if you do it. And if you don't do it, you don't enjoy the course. And there's nothing I can do about it. I can do a song and dance up here, but I can't make you enjoy it if you don't do the reading. Not to the same degree at any rate. Anyway, we'll conclude with Renaissance poetry, and I put that at the end because it is part of the period, but also because it's short. They're short by that point. They're little poems. So they don't take a long time to read. They do take a long time to digest, though. So by that point, you don't have a big, long meal like the Odyssey is. You have a little but this is a little filet mignon at the end. So it's hard to digest. You got to read over it and think about it and so forth. But that will be the end of the course. Comments or questions about the texts at this point? Yes?
Are they all available upstairs?
They should be available in the bookstore. Yeah. Yes.
For the Odyssey, you said there was a translation that you suggested?
Richmond Lattimore, which is the one I read when I was an undergrad as well. It's still the best one.
This is the one that's available, and it's...
In the bookstore?
Yeah.
It better not be.
No, I got that one.
You got this one? Fagles, I don't like the translation.
Might be from the different teachers.
Maybe. Maybe. So go take it back, and I should talk to that other teacher. Translation's a difficult business. Yes?
For Oedipus, are we reading all 3 plays?
No, just Oedipus the King, Oedipus Rex. It does. It says that here. Yes, it does. Oedipus the King. So we're just reading the first one, which Aristotle says is the great tragedy. It's the model exemplary tragedy. So we'll look at Oedipus as a work unto itself, but we'll also look at it as a role model tragedy, and later playwrights will write tragedies as well, one of them being Shakespeare, whom I teach this semester as well. And we're going to look at 4 tragedies. And he will have read this, Shakespeare. The wonderful, inventive, original Shakespeare was actually copying a lot of ideas, themes, characters, myths from works that he read in school. And he read everything that we're reading here, by the way. Maybe not Beowulf, but everything else. Certainly read Dante, certainly read Homer, certainly read Virgil. So yes, do get the translations that I've recommended. They are better translations. 2, they tend to be more. We'll all be on the same with the same translation, so I'll read it out and I'll be able to refer to the page number, and it's just easier that way. And as I say, this is not an expensive version, which is also nice. So that. Any other questions there, as far as that goes? And if not, what on earth is that? Okay, we'll start with this. That's fine. I can put it on the big page. There's all sorts of course and instructor policies. Attendance, my attendance policy is the same as everyone else's. The swipe card thing is what it is. I don't like it myself at all. I'm told it's for the purposes of OSAP, tracking that sort of stuff, that you were attendant, whatever. I don't like the idea of swiping or something sort of. I'm recording this, so I won't say what I think about it. No, I will refrain. Communication and course webpage. The course webpage is under the classes.tyndale.ca, which you've already seen, I think. Right? And if you have, so I will, in addition to the syllabus, which is there, I will post other materials sometimes during the week thereof, so I'll attach additional things. So have a look at that regularly. I'll also put the essays up there, and I'll tell you that when they're going up, but I will put them on the course webpage as well, okay? So that's designed there to be beneficial to you, but I'll add a few other things up there along the way. I might do a lot of it in the next week or so, but that will be there, and I just direct you to that. So classes.tyndale.ca, and you log in and all your courses will be there under that site, okay? So I think you'll find that useful if you haven't got there already. Back to this. You heard about email already. I do use email on the weekend less, so don't email me the night before the essays due and expect me to respond right away, which is unfortunately all too common. Course webpage there, and copyright and all that stuff. A lot of this stuff is the same for all the courses, so you can just look at that. Coursework, late assignments. Yes, okay. So for me, I want you to hand your essays in the class. So give them to me at the beginning of the class, not at the end of the class. Show up for the class, the attendance is being taken, whatever. Don't disrupt the class by coming halfway through. Put it there at the beginning, paper copy, and I will write my chicken scratch English on there in red blood, which is very intimidating, and I might need a red pen. But I will give you extensive feedback. Your essays are I take them very seriously. It's the time when you really learn because you really start thinking about the topic when you write an essay. And obviously it helps you with your own English writing skills. That's a good thing, but for me it's more, it helps you to think about the topic. Now, your essays are also preparation for the exam. So they're not just random essay questions. You can do a random essay question if you want, propose one to me, but the ones that I give you will help prepare you for the exam. And the final exams are during the final exam week. We'll tell you more about that when the time comes. Yeah. All that you got. Here's the things that you need to pay attention to. No laptops. No electronic devices. So here's the reasoning for it. It doesn't help you, even though you think it does. You can write more. So I'm recording this anyway, so that's electronic means there. So if you miss something, you're worried about that. Studies have demonstrated what I knew even before the studies demonstrated it, which is that, because I observed it myself, I can type, I can touch type, I can type a lot faster than I can write with my hand. However, that does not translate into remembering what I typed. So my notes are there. But the purpose of taking notes is to learn what you're hearing and to remember it. And the act of writing, particularly with a pencil, by the way, because a pencil drags on the paper, it's harder to write than a ballpoint pen or and that dragging of the pencil on the paper and having to form the characters helps you remember and actually process the information. And no keyboard can help you with that. So, and you're going to have to write on the exam for the most part, again, unless you have an accommodation. The accommodation, you might not need the accommodation if you did more writing. You would find that you got more from the class if you were. One of the other benefits of writing is you can't write everything that I'm saying. And that's good for two reasons. One, most of it's not worth writing down. And two, what is worth writing down, you have to put in your own words, and that processing will really help you gain understanding. So take good notes, and note-taking is a skill. Questions about that? Turn the cell phones off as well for the sake of everyone else. The other thing I find with laptops is, though you think that you're looking at it, you're also multitasking, looking, and your email pops up whether you want it or not, and it distracts you, and you look at it invariably, and the person beside you is also looking at it. So it totally disrupts the class. But so there you go. As I said, YouTube lectures should be there. And then there's all these regular Tyndale policies, which I actually, even though I'm not going to go through them at great length, some of them are quite useful. So for the Center for Academic Excellence, if you know right now that you're not a good writer, you might want to sign up right now. Because comes at the end of September when you have to write your essay, everyone else is going to be in there. But if you go now, you can book and actually have an appointment, and that might help you. I failed my first essay in English, by the way. Failed it, which was not fun. Best thing that ever happened to me, but I didn't like it much. And I eventually went to an essay writing center and so forth, and they gave me some tips, and I started working and thinking about being a better writer. One of the ways you get to be a better writer is by reading good writers, not newspaper writers. They're not good writers. We are reading good writers. And the other is by writing yourself and being corrected. So I'll do that when we come to the essays. So the Center for Academic Excellence, accessibility services, if you need them, they're there, they're useful, and advising and so forth, and all the links are there. So I direct you to them. Grading scale, you get to that when you get it. And then the course bibliography. Okay, so these are other works. Now let me say it very clearly here. All I want you to read is the texts here on the primary syllabus. I've thrown up some in the bibliography here. I do not want you to read them if you haven't read the primary stuff. And the primary stuff is enough. It will take enough of your time. These are useful works. Some of them, the ones that I've highlighted and given like C.S. Lewis's The Discarded Image, or John Mark Reynolds' When Athens Met Jerusalem, or Isabel Rivers' Classical and Christian Ideas in English Renaissance Poetry, or Peter Lightheart's Heroes of the City of Man, a Christian guide to select ancient literature. These are excellent works. But I don't want you to just repeat what somebody else says about it. I want you to think through it yourself. But I put that there anyway. So the main course, so let me give you one final analogy. When you write a sermon, has anyone ever given a sermon or done a Bible study? When you're in a Bible study, and you're sitting there and you're trying to get into the text and understand what's going on there, do you read the text or do you read the commentary at the bottom? Who goes to the commentary at the bottom? The whole Bible study goes to the commentary at the bottom. Some people who haven't read the text go immediately to the commentary at the bottom. Well, what if the commentary at the bottom is wrong? The Bible is the Word of God. The commentary is not the Word of God. And sometimes it has an important thing to add to it, but it's an addition. It's an addition. You've got to get to the main thing, which is the text itself. So the focus on this course will be the main text, not on what the commentators have said about the text. And it's more than enough. If you read all the works on the course, you've done very well, and I'll be very happy with you, and you will be happier with yourself. And so don't worry about the commentators. In fact, for your essays, I don't want to see secondary sources. Not from the internet, not anywhere. You and the text, your thoughts. It's a bit intimidating. But I don't care what some other scholar said about it. I want to know what you think. And that will require you to think. And that's the scary bit. Yeah, it is. You're exposed. Your ability to write is exposed. It's all terrible. It's all very humbling. And it's all very much a part of the process of growing as students with minds. And minds that are dedicated to worshiping God right. So we'll work on that here. Any other comments or questions? And if not, I've gone on way longer than I usually do. Comments or questions? And by the way, this is not the end of it, but for this class. Yes?
Is the same outline roadmap here available on just the Tyndale?
Yes. So classes.tyndale.ca, and it's right here, the syllabus. So click on that, and it comes up in a Word document. Okay? Yes?
Is the first essay just on the first one?
No, it will contain a variety of, so it's up to, the first essay is due September 30th, if I recall, and it will cover everything up to that point. And when I say cover, it will give you options. So there will be something like 6 or 7 different possible essay topics. Some of them will be on the Odyssey, one of them or 2 of them will be on Oedipus the King. So you can do it on an epic or on the tragedy. Okay? Yes?
Oh, so we're doing analysis? Like a lot, like...
When you come to the essays?
Yeah.
I want you to engage with the texts. So if you're a biblical studies major, you'll find that the skills that you need for that major are useful on this one. Engaging with the text, seeing the sophistication in the literary text, because there's a lot of sophistication going on there. It's not just conveying information. It's not giving statistical information, that's for sure. So yes, you're going to engage with the text and do exegesis to some degree. But largely I'll be asking you to do thematic studies. That helps? Okay. Other questions? When I give you the essay questions, we can talk those through more. And we will do that. Anyone else? If not, yes, go ahead.
Somewhat unrelated, but I didn't scan my clock.
Yeah, I think you...
So is there a certain point where...
No, I think you can still do it while the class is going on. So do it on your way out. Yeah. And if not, I don't care about this class's attendance the first day anyway, because people will come into the class and drop out of the class. Sometimes the swipe card doesn't even work. I've already had one person come up and say mine's not working yet. That happens every year. So I just don't care about the first class. Yeah, in terms of monitoring attendance and stuff like that. It's like, oh, whatever. You were there, you were there. Maybe I should do the attendance. Nah, I'm not going to do that. I don't like it. But I'm Dr. Masson, so if you thought you were in another class, it's a little bit too late now. You've sat through this terrible lecture. I guess you can walk out and get out of here. And if not, welcome to Tyndale, and I shall see you next class. Do buy this, and I would recommend, we'll talk about books 1 to 4 next time, but I would suggest that you try and finish this book as quickly as you possibly can. Enjoy it. You may find reading it out loud helps. It often does. But it's a very enjoyable read. Okay, see you then.
Thank you.